address us on Holocaust Remembrance. Rather than recite the many accolades, not to mention testimonials associated with our speaker, Anne Klaeysen, just a few nouns. Anne Klaeysen, leader, scholar, teacher, counselor, fomenter, enthusiast, inspiration, beacon of light. Anne Klaeysen.
Okay, now I have to live up to those nouns. Thank you so much. That's great. Okay. Here we go. Well, good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to speak before you, and today is a special day because it's a time when we remember not only that time in history that we've referred to as the Holocaust, but also bear in mind other genocides throughout our history. And I'm not going to list them all, but we will highlight some of them. Tomorrow is Yom HaShoah, and that is the day that commemorates the lives and heroism of Jewish people who died in the Holocaust between 1933 and 1945. It falls on April 8th this year. It falls on different days, on different years, but it will be tomorrow. Today, April 7th, is the Tutsi Genocide Memorial Day. So we will also be talking about Rwanda today. And not coincidentally, perhaps, or I guess it is a coincidence, also in April, and I'm reminded of T.S. Eliot, the poet, who referred to April as being the cruelest month. On April 11th, 1945, the U.S. Army entered the Buchenwald concentration camp near Weimar, Germany. At the time, there had been reports of concentration camps from the field, but no American had seen the camps for themselves. The American soldiers who arrived at Buchenwald would become the first Western observers of one of the worst atrocities in human history. One of the children liberated at the camp that day was a teenager named Elie Wiesel, who would go on to win the Nobel Peace Prize. In his memoir, All the Rivers Run to the Sea, he wrote, "I will never forget the American soldiers and the horror that could be read on their faces. I will especially remember a black sergeant, a muscled giant, who wept tears of impotent rage and shame. We tried to lift him on our shoulders to show our gratitude, but we didn't have the strength. We were too weak to even applaud him." We're going to have some readings this morning, too, that will highlight not only the Holocaust, but also the genocide of Native Americans in this country, slavery of African Americans, and also commemorate today's Tutsi Genocide Memorial Day. And our first reading is a poem that Clara will read to us by a child from Theresienstadt. Are you familiar with Theresienstadt? This was a camp that was set up to be the showplace for the Red Cross, the International Red Cross. And out of that camp came some beautiful music. And you're probably aware of some of the beautiful music that came out of that. There were also thousands of children there. And they went to school, they had art classes, and they wrote poetry. So Clara will read a poem to us.
Here I sit on a rock in front of the campfire. One branch after another is snatched by the fire. Into the darkness the forest recedes. Fire makes one reflect. Terrorism is all I think about. But now memories gather around me like the falling leaves. Fall is here. The leaves turn yellow on the trees. Campfire dies out. My thoughts are far from here, somewhere far, where integrity lives. It lives in my friend. Now I think of her. Memories gather around me like the falling leaves.
Thank you, Clara. I'm going to name the crime. There is a story to the genocide. Words have power. At least that was the hope of the man who gave the ultimate crime, the killing of whole groups of people, a name. It started with a single murder on March 14, 1921, in a district of Berlin. We come back to Berlin today. A 24-year-old Armenian, Soghomon Tehlirian, crept up behind Talat Pasha, the former Turkish interior minister, placed a revolver at the back of his head, and pulled the trigger, shouting, "This is to avenge the death of my family." In 1915, Talat Pasha had presided over the killing by firing squad, bayoneting, bludgeoning, and starvation of nearly 1 million Armenians. Tehlirian, then 19, marched in a column of some 20,000 people, including his mother and siblings, when his hometown was emptied. The journey was harrowing. His sisters were raped. His brother's head was split open with an axe. His mother was shot. And Tehlirian was struck unconscious with a blow to his head and left for dead. He woke hours later in a field of corpses. While Tehlirian awaited trial in Berlin, Raphael Lemkin, a 21-year-old Polish Jew studying linguistics at the University of Lwów, read an article about Talat's assassination. He was intrigued and asked one of his professors why the Armenians did not have Talat arrested for the massacres. The professor said that there was no law under which he could be arrested. Lemkin said, "It is a crime for Tehlirian to kill a single man, but it is not a crime for his oppressor, who killed more than 1 million people?" Appalled that the state of sovereignty would shield men who tried to wipe out an entire minority, Lemkin researched the Armenian tragedy. Here was the ethical dilemma. How does one judge Tehlirian's act, holding him up to the moral order of humanity? The case turned into an informal trial of deceased Talat's crimes against Armenians. But Lemkin was uncomfortable that Tehlirian had acted as a self-appointed legal officer for the conscience of humanity, and that passion would make a travesty of justice. There needed to be some way to hold mass murderers accountable. A parallel story. Henry Morgenthau Sr., a German-born Jew who had come to the U.S. as a 10-year-old boy, had been appointed ambassador to the Ottoman Empire by President Wilson in 1913, and he agitated for U.S. diplomatic intervention during this massacre of Armenians. In early 1915, he received information and intelligence from his councils, and at first he didn't recognize that these atrocities were of a different nature than the wartime violence. When it began to sort of pick up in earnest, the Jewish authorities severed Morgenthau's communications with his councils, and they censored their letters. Although incredulous, by July the ambassador came around and he cabled Washington about what he called race murder. Morgenthau said, "Technically, I had no right to interfere. According to the cold-blooded legalities of the situation, the treatment of Turkish subjects by the Turkish government was purely a domestic affair, unless it directly affected American lives and American interests. It was outside the concern of the American government." Morgenthau pled with his superiors to issue a direct government-to-government appeal on behalf of humanity to stop the killings. But because Americans were not endangered by the Turkish horrors, and because American neutrality in World War I remained fixed, his plea had no response. When the war ended in 1918, the question of war guilt was addressed at the Paris Peace Conference. Britain, France, and Russia urged that state authorities in Germany, Austria, and Turkey be held responsible for the violations of the laws of war and the laws of humanity, and began planning the century's first international war crimes tribunal. But America's growing post-war isolation determined that the state's right to be left alone superseded any individual right to justice. So, it happened, of course, later that Talleyrand found Talat and executed him on behalf of his family. Let's get back to Raphael Lemkin for a moment. In 1933, now an attorney, Lemkin drafted a paper for an international law conference in Madrid that drew attention to Hitler's ascent and to the Ottoman slaughter of Armenians. It was a radical proposal. It was an appeal to the international community to unite in a campaign to ban the practice of massacring groups of people. He prepared the law that would prohibit the destruction of nations, races, religious groups, anything that he called universal repression. And he called for a kind of a universal jurisdiction. Well, not much happened in Madrid, but at least he had put out the effort, and he issued a moral challenge to the community there. Sadly, this conference did what too many conferences do. They tabled it. The crime of barbarity repeated itself, but it was hard to conceive of in peacetime, and it was too late once it was underway. But he didn't give up. Lemkin traveled from one conference to another, promoting his proposal. Lemkin warned the world about Hitler and his designs, but everyone scoffed. He found refuge in the United States in 1941, and he continued to fail, to reach out to win support for any kind of measure to protect the Jews in Europe. The Allies resisted denouncing Hitler's atrocities, granting refuge to Europe's Jews, and bombing railroad tracks to concentration camps. Even after they had that information, they resisted. Churchill, in 1941, said, "We are in the presence of a crime without a name." A crime without a name. Aha! Lemkin says, I gotta give this a name. Maybe if I give it a name, people will pay attention. So he scribbled and he circled the word, all in capital letters. We need a word. And he drew a line connecting the circle to the phrase, moral judgment. He wanted his word to do it all, a rare term that would carry society's revulsion and indignation. So he settled on a word that was a hybrid that combined the Greek derivative geno, meaning race or tribe, together with the Latin derivative cid, meaning caedere or killing. So genocide. Genocide was short, it was novel, and it was not likely to be mispronounced. Genocide meant a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. Lemkin placed unusual trust in language. Remember, he was originally a linguist. Not everyone agreed, and some thought him naive. But he believed that naming the crime was the first step to banning it. A law was needed. If piracy was an international crime, Lemkin could not understand why genocide was not. In May 1946, Lemkin went to Nuremberg to lobby for the inclusion of the word genocide in the vocabulary that the prosecutors were using there. Even if genocide were not punished, at least the court could popularize the new term. Well, indeed, they did refer to it on October 1945. An indictment stated that all 24 defendants conducted deliberate and systematic genocide. In other words, the extermination of racial and national groups against the civilian populations of certain occupied territories. This was the first official mention of genocide in an international legal setting. He continued to draft a statement that would go to the General Assembly of the United Nations. His aim, again, was to establish an international law that would approach this in a way and would remind folks. The United Nations, bear in mind, was a collection of nations, and they wanted to hold their sovereignty above all. If this were to be accepted, it would mean that people could cross national boundaries and come into their countries. Nations did not want that. Anyway, he organized a committee, and in the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, they settled not only on his definition, but also making it a crime. It marked the first time that the United Nations adopted a human rights treaty. Lemkin was found in a darkened assembly hall, weeping as if his heart would break. This was a success after a 15-year fight, and it was overwhelming. He said, "It's an epitaph on my mother's grave and recognition that she and millions did not die in vain." Well, what happened here in the United States? Sadly, he never lived to see it ratified by the United States Senate. William Proxmire, senator from Wisconsin, picked up where Lemkin left off, and he delivered 3,211 speeches on the Senate floor urging ratification of the United Nations Treaty. After 19 years of daily soliloquies, Proxmire did manage to get the Senate to accept the Genocide Convention, but the U.S. ratification was so laden with caveats that it carried next to no force. It's the sad story of the word of genocide. Success on the one hand, and yet still that struggle. And now I invite Monica Weiss to come forward and read to us a passage about Native Americans here in the United States.
In November of 1969, a group of Indians seized the island of Alcatraz, the old prison site in San Francisco Bay. They refused the orders of the government to leave and were forcibly evicted in June of 1971. Here are excerpts from their statement explaining their claim to the island. Quote, "We, the Native Americans, reclaim the land known as Alcatraz Island in the name of all American Indians by right of discovery. We wish to be fair and honorable in our dealings with the Caucasian inhabitants of this land and hereby offer the following treaty. We will purchase said Alcatraz Island for $24 in glass beads and red cloth, a precedent set by the white man's purchase of a similar island about 300 years ago. Our offer of $1.24 per acre is greater than the 47 cents per acre that the white men are now paying the California Indians for their land. We will give to the inhabitants of this island a portion of that land for their own, to be held in trust by the American Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Caucasian Affairs to hold in perpetuity, for as long as the sun shall rise and the rivers shall go down to the sea. We will further guide the inhabitants in the proper way of living. We will offer them our religion, our education, our life ways in order to help them achieve our level of civilization and thus raise them and all their white brothers up from their savage and unhappy state. We offer this treaty in good faith and wish to be fair and honorable in our dealings with all white men. We feel that this so-called Alcatraz Island is more than suitable for an Indian reservation, as determined by the white man's standards. By this we mean that this place resembles most Indian reservations in that It is isolated from modern facilities and without adequate means of transportation. It has no fresh running water. It has inadequate sanitation facilities. There are no oil or mineral rights. There is no industry, and so unemployment is very great. There are no healthcare facilities. The soil is rocky and non-productive, and the land does not appear to support game. There are no educational facilities. The population has always exceeded the land base. The population has always been held as prisoners and kept dependent upon others. And further, it would be fitting and symbolic that ships from all over the world entering the Golden Gate would first see Indian land and thus be reminded of the true history of this nation. This tiny island would be a symbol of the great lands once ruled by free and noble Indians.
Thank you. And now Pamela will read a passage from an African American tradition.
How are we going to deal with the microphone here?
I'm going to bring it over to you.
Actually, it would be better if you could bring the stand over and we could put it on the stand. Okay. I mean, not that,
Oh, I see what you're
that
saying.
one, yeah.
Gotcha.
So bring that over. Okay, and let me kind of face the audience a little bit.
Teamwork.
Scooters require logistics.
There you go.
And then if we can kind of bend that. Good. Is that good? Wonderful. Thank you. Turn this off so I don't go scootering into the audience. This is a speech given by Sojourner Truth, who lived from 1797 to 1883. Okay? Now, it was delivered in 1851 at the Women's Convention in Akron, Ohio. So we have Sojourner Truth, born a slave, 1797 to 1883. She must have been awfully healthy because that's a long life for someone with a hard life. And the title is Ain't I a Woman? Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women at the North, all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me my best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as any man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, seen most sold off to slavery, and when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? A member of the audience whispers intellect. That's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint, and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then, that little black man there, he says women can't have as much rights as men, because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do it. The men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me. And now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say.
I'm making it worse, aren't I? Please don't trip. There we go, got it. I mentioned that today is the Tutsi Genocide Memorial Day, so John will come up and read something about that.
It should fit me up, right? Rwanda. Philip Gorovich, we wish to inform you that tomorrow we will be killed with our families. Strauss and Giroux, New York, 1998. Decimation means the killing of every 10th person in a population. And in the spring and early summer of 1994, a program of massacres decimated the Republic of Rwanda. Although the killing was low-tech, performed largely by machete, it was carried out at dazzling speed of an original population of about 7.5 million. At least 800,000 people were killed in just 100 days. Rwandans often speak of 1 million deaths, and they may be right. The dead of Rwanda accumulated at nearly 3 times the rate of Jewish death during the Holocaust. It was the most efficient mass killing since the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Today, April 7th, and Tutsi Genocide Memorial Day. It is Tutsi Genocide Memorial Day. Every year, Rwanda's President Paul Kagame presides at a commemoration ceremony at one of the major massacre sites that have been preserved as memorials to the victims. Excerpts from Paul Gorovich's article, The Life After, The New Yorker, 5409 follow. In 2005, a ceremony was held at Murambi, where a young man in his mid-20s got up to speak. A survivor, Kagame said, somebody who was actually killed almost and dumped in a mass grave of close to 4,000 people. Our forces arrived after they had just been killed and brought out 12 people from the mass grave who survived. They had been cut with machetes and were in bad shape. They were treated and nursed, and over time, this young person was there giving testimony of what happened. Next excerpt. At the end of this account, he said, recently some of those people who killed our families and killed us have been released. They are there in the village living normally. Kagame has issued that order granting the killers reprieve. So after the ceremony, he called the young man over, and I asked him, how do you manage? When you meet them, what do they tell you, or what do you tell them? What is your feeling? I want you to genuinely tell me how you feel. This young man looked me in the face and said, well, President, I manage because you asked us to manage. This is what he told me, he said, President, I manage because you asked me to manage. Gakaka, a word meaning justice on the grass in the Kinyarwanda language and referring to a system of outdoor community courts convened for genocide cases, streamlining the process by replacing lawyers and judges with everyday Rwandans, was designed to reward confessions because the objective was not only to render rudimentary justice and made-out punishment, but also to allow some emotional catharsis by establishing a collective accounting of the truth of the crimes in each place where they were committed. Not the victims, not the perpetrators. Nobody will tell you he is happy with the Gagacha, Kagame said, and he thought that was probably the best one could hope for. He didn't want either side to be happy because whichever way we go, we are left with nothing. Kagacha gives us something to build on. The heart of the matter it in these words, in these parts, is in these stories.
Thank you, John. Imagine what it must be like in Rwanda after all this time to live next door to someone who may very well have killed your family. And it speaks to the President Paul Kagame, and he really is this personality that people say, well, I'm not happy. I don't know how I manage, but I manage because of you. Because you have pulled us all together, and you say that we should call ourselves Rwandans, and not Tutsis and Hutus, but Rwandans. And for you, we will do this. I'd like to believe that we don't still live with genocide, and yet we do. Recently, there was a trial in Guatemala that brought to some kind of justice someone who had tried to wipe out an Indian tribe in Guatemala. And this was brought to the attention of the United Nations, of course, but what's remarkable about this is that also, and his name is General Etran Reyes Montt. He's now 86 years old. He's a former head of state being tried for genocide in the courts of his own country. This is very important because Guatemala had not done this before and people were terrified to come forward. He wiped out whole villages and it had a profound effect on his nation. These were indigenous peoples who came forward to testify against him. There's another kind of genocide going on that I think we're aware of. We talked about it in our Thursday lunch discussions, and that's a gender genocide. And there are countries, there are cultures, there are societies that kill girls. And now with technology and with sonograms, you can tell the gender, the sex of the fetus. And so if you have some moral compunctions about committing infanticide, well, you can abort the female fetus. And that is what continues to go on today in India and in China. It's been depressing this morning, and I want to leave you inspired. So we always talk about the 3 A's, that's awareness, advocacy, and action. So it's time to introduce to you the children of our Ethics for Children program. We have raised some awareness here with the different readings, and we could go on and on. We could spend a whole day with the readings from different cultures and different societies who've experienced this. And what I'm so delighted about with our children is that their last session, they put together a video called Animating Peace. And I think this is a wonderful conclusion to what we have been talking about this morning. So I'm going to introduce their teachers, Amy Reed and Audrey Kindred, and have a seat, be comfortable. And we want to thank you very much for joining us this morning. And if you could give us sort of tell us a little bit about this film. I know they've got it all worked out, so go ahead.
Okay, everybody, let's say hello to the ethical culture community by giving them a nice wave and maybe showing them a peace sign. And I'm Audrey Kindred. I've been with New York Ethical Culture creating the children's programming. We have just completed a session called Animating Peace because we have a great gift in our staff, which is an artist who works specifically with animation. So we're able to bring to life the ideas of ethics for children. So Animating Peace was our semester where we made a movie that we're about to watch with you. And now we're beginning a new semester called Animating Earth, where we're listening to the needs of the earth. And we'll begin to make new movies about that we can see later this season. Do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I just hope you enjoy all the animations. This is the first one is the longest one we made, and then the other ones are exercises.
We're going to sit down and watch them. Come up here, right in front.
stars.
All we are saying is give peace a chance. All we are saying is give peace a chance. All we are saying is give peace a chance.
We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we'll walk hand in hand someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday.
It's not over. It's not over.
We put stars on it because it was a motion of peace. So like new people can learn new languages if you want to learn more about Earth.
Anybody could be a hero.
Yeah, this is the heart.
And in the heart has the words of peace, song, laugh, charm, helpful, love, hope, life.
I wrote The Hunger Games, and I drew that because Katniss is kind of heroic in it. Good ideas until you can see them.
We decided to make them just really little because what Change the Hero is inside, not outside.
And we just leave it like blue and purple skin because it's like unique and it's different from other people.
Facebook, you can find that on the Ethics for Children Facebook page and share it with all your Facebook friends. Its intention is partly to really spread the word about ethics for children by getting out past
this community into a wider framework so that ethics for children becomes the gossip of the world and the interest and the compelling future of where our children are focused. So I'd like to ask you adults if any of you would like to share one reflection about what you saw so that the children can hear what you appreciated about what you saw today. Yes?
It was adorable and very meaningful.
It was adorable and very meaningful, she said. Thank you. You can look at who's talking so that you can see what they're saying to you, okay? Anybody? Yes?
Well, I'm just reminded that when I was their age, I sang that very same song. And so it's just wonderful to hear them singing that song now when they're the age I was when I sang it, age 10.
That's nice.
With Pete Seeger.
Ah,
yes.
yeah. Yeah. Yes.
We can make unity in diversity.
We can make unity and diversity. That's what she saw. Yes.
I was very interested in your definition of peace. I wrote it down. I hope I got it right. Is that freedom, love, respect, and happiness?
Freedom, love, respect, and happiness. Does that sound like your ideas? Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very important definition of peace because it's a lot bigger than just not fighting.
Right.
And not having a war.
Right.
So I want to thank you for that definition of peace.
She really liked that you guys had positive ideas about peace. Right? That's nice. Thank you for pointing that out. One more person? Yes.
The animation is very joyful and talented.
Joyful and
Very
talented.
good work. Very good.
Thank you, everybody. Now, you guys, we're going to sit down and we're going to get a chance. We've been practicing the
We've
song.
been practicing the song.
Yes.
You know, the last lady who just spoke, she wrote that song.
Where?
Right.
Oh,
So
you
you're
wrote
gonna
that?
get to sing
Let's
it.
give her a clap. We like practicing your song. We get to sing it with all of you now, okay?
And I'm going to close with a poem, another poem from the book from which Clara read earlier. This is another poem by a child from the Theresian concentration camp. We don't know his name, his or her name, and it's called Birdsong. He doesn't know the world at all, who stays in his nest and doesn't go out. He doesn't know what birds know best, nor what I want to sing about, that the world is full of loveliness. When dewdrops sparkle in the grass and earth's aflood with morning light, a blackbird sings upon a bush to greet the dawning after night. Then I know how fine it is to live. Hey, try to open up your heart to beauty. Go to the woods someday and weave a wreath of memory there. But if the tears obscure your way, you'll know how wonderful it is to be alive. Thank you.